Okay, so once again, I'm watching as many movies on the IMDb bottom 100 as possible, which now takes us past two that aren't streaming anywhere that I have, which leads us to number 85, Batman and Robin. Wow, I must be the first person to talk about this online. Alright, we know it's the deadest of all horses, this is tacky, but I have to, it's what's next on the list. I mean, what am I going to do? Disobey the list? Interestingly, I watched all of these the weekend before they were set to leave HBO Max. Batman and Robin was watched just the day before. Yes, they all left. The Warner Brothers streaming service couldn't even keep the rights to one of their most recognizable properties for some reason. Okay, yes, I have seen all of these movies before as a kid, but not since then, so I rewatched all of them to make this video. And I guess we're going to start at the beginning with the original Batman. A movie with a long history. The producers bought the rights to the character in the late 70s, but were having trouble pitching it. They wanted to make it dark like the comics, but the studios were more interested in having it be like the lighter, campier show from the 1960s. It was still officially announced in 1980 without the involvement of any studio, and then finally Warner Brothers picked it up. But the movie didn't come out until 1989, so obviously something went wrong from here. It spent a lot of time in development hell. It received 9 rewrites by 9 different writers and many different stories. It also went through many filmmakers such as Ivan Reitman, Joe Dante, and Wes Craven. Apparently Reitman wanted Bill Murray as Batman and to have Eddie Murphy as Robin. I actually want to see how that would have turned out. Finally, it went to Tim Burton after the success of Pee-wee's Big Adventure, but the studio didn't give them the green light until the success of Beetlejuice, and also Michael Keaton was cast as Batman. Both Burton and Keaton were savagely criticized by fans since both of them were really only known for comedic stuff at the time. Warner Brothers received 50,000 letters from fans demanding that they recast, and even the producers didn't believe Keaton can do it. But in the end, they were wrong because this turned out to be a great movie. Once again, Batman fans suck at judging casting calls. Is Keaton better than Christian Bale? I'm gonna split the difference and say that Keaton is the better Batman and Bale is the better Bruce Wayne. Oh yeah, before we get more into my thoughts, more Wikipedia stuff. The trailer I'm sending this to probably doesn't look much like a trailer. That's because of the backlash. The ad agency put it together really quick just to shut him up. It's basically just a bunch of scenes from the movie without any music. If I need to splice in footage from other scenes to pad it out, they probably won't look much different from the actual trailer. But it apparently worked because audience clapped and cheered for it. Anyway, I'm going to continue my review with a controversial statement. I prefer Tim Burton's Batman movies to Nolan's. And I love the Nolan films. I prefer these. It's as dark as the character deserves, but at the same time it doesn't forget that he's also a comic book character, which gives it sort of a balance between The Dark Knight and... we'll get into that. I'm not saying it's the main reason I prefer it, but it's cool to have something dark and gritty but also aesthetically pleasing at the same time. This is helped by Tim Burton's signature style. He's good at making dark stuff that feels light-ish. Apparently, Burton wasn't a big fan of comics originally. Now I feel bad about saying this was my favorite, but he was a huge fan of The Dark Knight Returns and The Killing Joke, two then recent comics whose success helped restore Warner Brothers' interest in this movie, and he tried to recreate that tone, and that darkness really helped make all the difference. One of the biggest standouts, as with many Batman films, is the Joker. He's played by Jack Nicholson, who is perfect for this movie. He is as crazy and threatening as any version of the Joker, but it's also a little more animated as you'd expect from a criminal who dresses like a clown and kills people with laughing gas. Also, music for many of his scenes was provided by Prince at the request of the studio. Apparently a lot of people, including Burton himself, thought these songs were out of place. I personally disagree. I think they fit pretty well into the scenes they're in because he's being really showy and this big, upbeat music reflects that, and it also reflects his over-the-top happy psyche. One music thing I think we can all agree on is this. Danny Elfman's score is iconic. That score is Batman for me. Anyway, some people criticize it for being too dark and thought the Joker outshined everything else, both of which I'm guessing they eventually got used to, but overall it was still critically acclaimed and was a smash hit, making more than $400 million. It broke records including highest opening weekend, highest second weekend, fastest movie to get to $100 million, and was the highest grossing DC film until The Dark Knight beat it. It was also everywhere in terms of merchandise and a phenomenon known as Batmania. Also, while we're at it, Batmania is linked on the Wikipedia page, but if you click it, it just takes you halfway down the page for Listomania. That wasn't very useful. But despite all the success, Warner Brothers still lost millions off of it due to an accounting error. Damn. And the executive producers claim to have been cheated out of continuing involvement and didn't see a cent of that money. The court rejected their lawsuit, but Warner Brothers offered an out-of-court payoff of what the producer's lawyer described as 2 popcorns and 2 Cokes. That sounds bad, but considering how much theaters charge for that... It also had a continuing impact on the business, including emphasis on opening weekends, a narrowing window between theaters and video releases, leading to the death of many second-run theaters, more emphasis on adaptations and merchandising, the importance of the PG-13 rating, and non-traditional casting for genre films. So except for that last one, not very good stuff. It also led to the creation of the 12 rating in the UK, which looks to be their version of the American PG-13. Got that just a little later than us. But in conclusion, it's weird how a non-comic book fan made one of the most influential comic book movies ever. Anyway, the success of the first Batman prompted the creation of two things: Batman the Animated Series, and of course, Batman Returns, presumably with better accounting this time. Tim Burton apparently didn't want to return for the franchise at first, but then the studio gave him complete control over the project. It's weird to say that about a superhero movie today, especially one from Warner Brothers. But it was that control of the movie that made it what I consider to be just as good, if not better, than the original. It's surely more Tim Burton-esque this time around. I mean, the first one was very Tim Burton, and he still managed to double down here. This time, Batman's going up against Danny DeVito's The Penguin and Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. Both of them are tied to Christopher Walken, who plays the original character. Just a normal guy, except that he's an evil, power-hungry rich guy. No gimmicks, just white-collar evil that can be seen in the real world. The story is a little more complex this time around. While the Joker just wants to cause chaos because that's his thing and that's why he's popular, these guys have more clearly defined motives and backstories. The Penguin story is like House of Cards without the uncomfortable casting. The whole thing is almost like a noir that just happens to feature a bunch of guys in weird suits. So, closer to Nolan's movies. It's darker and more violent than the original, so much so that it caused controversy among parents and even caused McDonald's to cancel their Happy Meal promotion with the movie. More on that later. So the villains kind of steal the show again. Not as good as Nicholson's Joker, but still pretty damn good. They're both tragic figures, and in the long run the most evil villain here is Walken's normal guy character. And not just because he's somewhat grounded in reality. One of the things that struck me most about this movie as a kid was how at the end it actually made me feel for the Penguin. I was like, for the vast majority of the movie I was thinking, oh, this guy sucks, Batman's gonna take him down. But then with one scene of the Penguin's carrying his body, suddenly I felt bad. Michelle Pfeiffer is also great as Catwoman. She brings a cool and sexy vibe to her character. Apparently they saw so much potential that they wanted to give her a spin-off movie. More on that later as well. Also, a random scene I need to mention. Batman totally broke his no-kill rule in this movie. In a big way. There's this one guy who he straps a bomb to his chest and throws into a ditch where he fucking explodes. He could not have survived that. I've seen The Hurt Locker. I know blowing up kills people. Sure, but shooting bad guys is bad. Gotta do something horrific and gruesome. And they put it in the trailer, except they just show him being thrown aside. Way to cover up Batman's atrocities. Anyway, this was a big step closer to the Batman movies of the future. Something dark and adult, and most importantly, great. Continuing with the reading of the Wikipedia page. So, as I mentioned before, the darker tone and the increased levels of violence and sexual content caused backlash among parents and fast food clowns. It also made less money than the original. Only $266 million on a budget that was mostly $80 million. Oh, what a horrible tragedy. They've got to change something now. So Warner Brothers decided that the reason it made them only rich instead of super rich was because the people didn't want a dark Batman. So they decided to take this into a different direction. Yeah, that sounds more like a superhero movie studio. They also did not hire Burton to direct the next one, though they gave him producer credit. But he did still sign on to direct the Catwoman movie I mentioned earlier, although when he wrote the script, the studio rejected it because, once again, they were going in a lighter direction. Because of this, it was in development hell for years, being rewritten and losing a lot of people involved, including Burton, until finally... I might end up having to watch that one too. Depends how much longer I can keep this channel running. But anyway, they hired cult filmmaker the late Joel Schumacher. Keaton originally wanted to return but then changed his mind because he didn't like where the franchise was headed. So they replaced him with Val Kilmer, leading to Batman Forever. Tim Burton has admitted that he hated that title, by the way. Okay, so the Batman franchise appears to have a similar trajectory to the Superman franchise. There's the original that everyone loves, the second that is seen as just as good, the third that everyone hates, and the fourth that is considered to be one of the worst movies of all time and kills the franchise until the 2000s. But I'm going to reject that view because, well, Batman Forever didn't bomb like Superman 3 did, but mostly because this one actually isn't that bad. Don't get me wrong, this is far from a perfect movie, but it's still decent. It's definitely different from the other two, and I'm not sure how I feel about those changes. It takes after the campy Batman show from the 60s, aka the show the producers of the original refused to take after, and that's also probably every Batman purist's worst nightmare. But for what it tried to be, it works pretty well. Gotham is no longer the dark, ugly, grimy place from the first two. It's now a bright, stylish city with lots of giant statues for some reason, including another Statue of Liberty. This has got to be the only successful attempt at gentrification ever made. The movie itself is filled with bright colors and over-the-top set pieces. In fact, over-the-top probably sums up the entire movie. The characters are over-the-top, the performances are over-the-top. Let me put it this way, Jim Carrey is in this movie as the Riddler and everything else in the movie is on his level for the most part. Particularly Tommy Lee Jones acting beside him as the other villain, Two-Face, who seems to be constantly trying to out Jim Carrey. I forgot to talk about Two-Face. I was going to describe what they did with him while talking about those other movies and have that lead up to this, but completely forgot about it until I got to this point. Okay, the first Batman actually had an appearance from Harvey Dent before he became Two-Face, where he was played by Billy D. Williams. Tim Burton was setting up to hopefully put him in a future sequel. He specifically wanted a black Two-Face because he felt that would help with the concept of black and white with his personality. Harvey Dent was even written into early drafts of Batman Returns in the role of what would turn into Christopher Walken's character. The end of that draft would have ended the same way for him, except that would have been what turned him into Two-Face, but they changed all that. Until finally, to Warren's disappointment, they replaced him with Tommy Lee Jones. Because what filmmakers think would be interesting is no match for Hollywood whitewashing. Anyway, back to the video. The lighter tone here mostly works. There is the occasional time where it got annoying, like that one guy Batman saves in the opening action sequence who keeps yelling really on-the-nose dialogue in an irritating voice and made me wish he'd just drop into the acid and die already, but the vast majority of it is charming for what it is, especially considering what's to come. Anyway, the story is about the two villains trying to read the minds of everybody in Gotham. Two-Face to find Batman's secret identity, and the Riddler simply to become smarter than everyone else. They do this by selling an invention the Riddler made where you strap it to your head and it messes with your brainwaves and allows you to see TV in 3D. Nice try, but as it turns out, nobody wants to see 3D TV even if it doesn't mess with their brains. Oh yeah, Val Kilmer's Batman. He's okay. But this movie definitely looks good. The production design is cool and the camera work was good enough to get an Oscar nomination for Best Cinematography. Yeah, one of the categories for actual Oscar movies. This is high art now. If you still say it's bad, you just don't understand film. However, this also marked the introduction of the infamous Batman suit with nipples. Oh, did I mention that Joel Schumacher is openly gay? I'm sure that never came up in criticisms back then. Well, he denied any homoerotic stuff. He said he was inspired by Greek statues while making the suit design, and I believe him since he does appear to have interest in that kind of thing. I also simply need to share the quote, "I had no idea putting nipples on the bat suit and Robin suit were going to spark international headlines." Oh yeah, and Robin's here too. His first introduction, played by Chris O'Donnell. Yeah, he's pretty good. He's an interesting character, at least in comparison to what's next for him. Anyway, love it or hate it, this is Schumacher's vision. It gets a lot of hate by association and from the fact that it's different from any other iteration of Batman, but it's a unique one that's unlike any superhero movie since. I want this shit forever mine, ever mine, ever mine. I can't believe they thought that taking away Batman's dark edge would make them more money than Batman Returns. Well, it did. I guess this must mean the franchise is headed in the right direction. Man, this next one's gonna be incredible.
In just a moment, we will return with another exciting adventure featuring a guest star from the galaxy of superheroes.
Emergency. Batman speaking. Warning all of you to brace yourselves for big news.
The biggest.
Tell them, Robin.
Holy superlatives, Batman! It's really exciting. Soon, very soon, Batman and I will be batapulting right out of your TV sets and onto your theater screens.
Batman and Robin was the first Batman film to not have Tim Burton involved at all. Just throwing that out there. So Val Kilmer did not return to this one, both so he can be in The Island of Dr. Moreau and because he didn't get along very well with Schumacher. The studio also gave this movie a quicker production time so that they can get it out quicker and told them to make it even more, in Schumacher's words, toyetic. I actually own pieces of film from this movie. See, like we got Batman and his Poison Ivy and Batman, of course. 3 from one of the greatest superhero movies ever. But enough of that, let's talk about the movie. This is even more bright and like what the 60s show presumably is. Too much so. Now it's every Batman purist's worst nightmare. I guess that must be why this comes up more often in conversations about the worst superhero movies ever made than another movie I talked about, Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. This is technically much better, but I guess it pissed off more people. I guess also, to be fair, this was a much bigger production. While Superman 4 was probably made for $5, this actually has some good production design, even a few action scenes that are good in a campy way. If only all this was in a better movie. The few of you who watched my video on Superman 4 may remember that I was grateful that it was so short considering how all the other Superman films were over 2 hours long, and how it only got that short because test audiences hated the longer cut and they had to remove a huge chunk of the plot. Well, I guess this one still had a better screening because, like all the other Batman movies, this is over 2 hours long. It's longer than Batman Forever. I didn't check, but it's also probably longer than all the other movies I had to watch for this list. Anyway, Clooney is alright in this one, I guess, although he might be the least brooding Batman since the 60s. None of the actors are the problem here, just the movie they're in. They're given a little too many corny one-liners and puns. If there are a few of those every now and then, that's cool. When it gets to this level, now you got a problem. Arnold Schwarzenegger would have probably made a decent Mr. Freeze if not for this. Uma Thurman hams it up pretty well as Poison Ivy, but overall she just really kinda seems like a second-rate imitation of Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman. However, I give it credit because both of them actually have somewhat sympathetic backstories like in Batman Returns. Mostly Mr. Freeze, but Poison Ivy at least starts out good and kills her evil boss, so that's something. Also Bane's here, not the one you probably like from The Dark Knight Rises, just some luchador jacked up with magic steroids who grunts instead of actually talking. Ironically, even though this is the one that actually has Robin in the title, Batman Forever is Robin's movie and not this one. In Forever, he felt like an actual character. He was a guy with something to prove and you kind of root for him. Here his personality is practically non-existent. But enough of all that character stuff that probably makes me sound smarter than I actually am. It's all the campiness and bad jokes and one-liners that sink this one. Okay, so this came out in 1997 and it was a box office disappointment and the lowest grossing Batman movie so far. It had a strong opening weekend but dropped 63% the weekend after. Everybody hated it. Joel Schumacher blamed the quality on the studio's decision to fast-track the production and pressure to make it family-friendly and marketable. George Clooney also vowed to never reprise the role and even apologized to Adam West for this movie. Because of the negative reception, the planned fifth movie called Batman Unchained, set to release in 1999, was cancelled. This would have had a similar tone, been directed by Schumacher, but had a different writer. The heroes would have the same actors fighting off the Scarecrow, played by Coolio. The Scarecrow would have also resurrected the Joker as a hallucination for Batman. The filmmakers hoped to have villains from the other films return this way, culminating with the Joker, who would hopefully be Jack Nicholson. And Harley Quinn was also written in as Joker's daughter. And Batman never came back until 2005 with Batman Begins, which would end up becoming one of the most celebrated iterations of the character. Anyway, I think the story of how we got to this point is an interesting one. They refused to be like this at the beginning, but still eventually bought into it and suffered for it.
And isn't it ironic? Don't you think?
Yes, I realize that's not ironic. Neither is anything in the song.